This entire story, as with many before, begins with a grim discovery. In the early days of April 2023, police in South Korea received a call about a tragic scene near the Daecheong Dam in Daejeon, 140 kilometers south of Seoul. What they found was harrowing: a shallow grave containing the remains of a woman. The body was soon identified as a missing 48-year-old resident of Gangnam, Seoul. This discovery weighed heavily on the investigators. Her disappearance had been reported just days earlier, and now their worst fears were tragically confirmed. With the location of the body established, detectives turned their attention to Gangnam, the last place she was seen alive. To find out what really happened to this woman, they needed to retrace her steps, and fast. Witnesses reported seeing her near her home on the night she vanished. In a district like Gangnam, with its maze of traffic intersections and ever-watchful security cameras, there was a chance that whatever had happened to her had been captured on film. Without hesitation, the team of officers began combing through hours of grainy footage from nearby cameras. Then at one quiet intersection they found it. At the bottom of the screen, the timestamp flickered: March 29, 2023, 11:49 p.m. The video shows a darkened street illuminated only by the faint glow of street lights. A car rolls into frame, slowing as it approaches the intersection, its headlights piercing through the darkness and casting shadows across the pavement. As the vehicle comes to a stop, both of its front doors swing open and some men step out purposefully. Suddenly the footage flashes and a new camera angle reveals a woman on the ground next to the car. She thrashes and kicks, her movements wild with desperation. One of the men grips her arms tightly, struggling to maintain control, but her resistance is fierce. Her legs kick out, her body twists, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, it seems that she might actually break free. Eventually, she manages to wriggle out of the man's grip, her arm flailing desperately toward the street. But the man lunges forward, grabbing her again with renewed force. His hand clamps over her mouth, muffling her screams. His grip is unrelenting, and slowly but surely he begins to overpower her. He drags her toward the car, her heels scraping against the asphalt and leaving faint streaks behind. Every second feels like an eternity, but with one final effort, he forces her closer to the open door and shoves her into the back seat. The car dipped under her weight, bouncing once as the door slams shut. The man then sprints to the front of the car, climbs into the passenger seat, and within moments the vehicle speeds off, disappearing into the night. The footage leaves no room for doubt. This is no random act of violence. It is a calculated and brutal abduction carried out in the heart of Gangnam, one of Seoul's most affluent districts. But the crime's origins trace back months earlier to an investment that went disastrously wrong. A cryptocurrency crash had set off a catastrophic chain of events, and those who had poured their trust and their savings into what they believed was a golden opportunity, now on the brink of desperation. Fortunes vanished overnight, replaced by anger, betrayal, and a desperate need for answers. For most, the devastation ended with financial ruin, but for others it ignited something far darker. When the numbers turned red, lives were shattered, and for the woman, her fate would unravel in the worst possible way. The woman in the CCTV video was positively identified as the victim, whose body had been discovered near the Daecheong Dam. Investigators connected the two through witness reports, the timing of her disappearance, and the clothing seen in the footage, which matched what she had been wearing when she was last seen alive. But the video alone wasn't enough to explain why she was taken or why she was murdered. What could have driven a group of individuals to such extreme lengths in the heart of one of Seoul's safest districts? Gangnam is a symbol of South Korea's modernity and prosperity. Known for its many luxury boutiques, towering skyscrapers, and high-end lifestyles, it's a place where safety and security are deeply prioritized. South Korea as a whole is recognized as one of the safest countries in the world, and violent crime is exceptionally rare. But in a place like Gangnam, it's nearly unthinkable. The district streets are lined with hundreds of surveillance cameras, and its neighborhoods are frequently patrolled by private security. And that's what made the events of March 29, 2023 so shocking. They shattered the illusion of safety, leaving a city grappling with how such a horrifying crime could unfold in one of its most protected neighborhoods. Due to the sensitive circumstances surrounding the case, the 48-year-old victim's name has not been made public in any available sources. However, with her identity confirmed and the details of her abduction coming to light, investigators turned their focus to her life, searching for anything that might explain why she had been targeted so brutally. They interviewed her family, friends, and colleagues, building a picture of a woman whose life on the surface seemed ordinary. But as they dug deeper, a more complex narrative began to emerge. She wasn't just a private individual. She was someone with significant influence in a specific high-stakes world. As investigators delved deeper, those closest to her described a woman deeply entangled in business dealings, someone who often shared advice and opportunities with those around her. But they also spoke of strained connections, relationships that had shifted from trust to tension over time. Piecing the information together, one common thread began to stand out: her involvement in cryptocurrency, and in that unforgiving market the seeds of this crime were sown. Cryptocurrency is a world built on promises of wealth, innovation, and freedom from traditional financial systems. But most, if not all, know that beneath its glossy surface lies a volatile and unpredictable market where fortunes can skyrocket one day and collapse the next. It's a world that's notorious for its high risks and constant conflict. With little regulation and built-in anonymity, it automatically becomes a breeding ground for fraud, betrayal, and crime. For the investigators working on the case, it didn't take long to uncover the victim's connection to this world. For the past few years, she had been working for a cryptocurrency firm called Pure, spelled P-U-R-E, a company that had once promised groundbreaking success in blockchain innovation, but had become embroiled in financial controversy. But South Korea, a global hub for cryptocurrency, has seen its fair share of such scandals. One of the most infamous was the collapse of Terra and Luna to tokens created by Korean crypto entrepreneur Do Kwon as the co-founder and CEO of Terraform Labs. Do Kwon oversaw a company that once promised financial revolution until their catastrophic crash in 2020 to wiped out fortunes overnight and sent shock waves through the global market. Cases like this revealed the vulnerability of even seemingly successful projects and highlighted the devastating consequences of unchecked greed and mismanagement. It was in this climate of uncertainty and scandal that Pure, the company tied to the victim, operated. Based on police investigations, the victim's last known clients were a couple, Yu Sang-won and his wife Hwang Yoon-hae. Sources indicate that the victim first approached the couple during a time when cryptocurrency, particularly her own project, Pure, was experiencing a surge in popularity. She presented herself as knowledgeable and trustworthy, leveraging her role, Pure, to highlight the company's innovative blockchain solutions and the potential for massive returns. Over a series of meetings, she builds a rapport with the couple, providing detailed explanations of the technology behind Pure and showcasing the early successes of similar projects. She assures them that investing now means securing their future and insists that this is the best time to capitalize on the opportunity. Drawn in by her confidence, Yu and Hwang ultimately decide to invest over 1 billion won, or about $700,000. At the time, they believed they were making a life-changing decision. But in early 2021, their hopes are shattered when the coin's value plummets by more than 95%. In an instant, their investment is gone, leaving them with almost nothing. The trust they placed in the victim curdles into anger. Now their loss isn't just financial anymore, it has become personal. With the discovery of the victim's body, her background in cryptocurrency, and the chilling CCTV footage of her abduction, police had assembled the most critical pieces of the puzzle. They knew the crime was likely targeted and meticulously planned, but there were questions that still remained unanswered, one of which was the identities of the men captured in the footage. To answer these questions, investigators looked into the vehicle's make, model, and license plate number. While the records do not explicitly state whether the vehicle was rented or personally owned, investigators likely used the license plate captured in the video to trace its origin. This is a standard procedure in cases like this, and it proved to be a critical lead. Through the vehicle's registration, they identified a name Li Qiangwu, and a brief background check of the man revealed a troubling history. Li Qiangwu's life had once been steady as the owner of a health club. He had built a modest but stable business, earning enough to support himself and maintain a sense of independence. But come the year 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic turned his world upside down. The lockdowns and restrictions forced his business to close, wiping out his primary source of income. Desperate for a way out, Li turned to cryptocurrency, investing what remained of his life savings into the pure coin. But by early 2021, his hopes were crushed and he was left financially ruined. To the police, these findings were enough to link him to the crime and elevate him as a prime suspect. But why would someone like Li Qiangwu target the victim? There was no doubt that she was affiliated with Pure, but she wasn't its founder or CEO, so why her? A plausible explanation at this point is that Li, unable to reach those at the top, redirected his anger and desperation towards someone connected to the coin that had devastated his life. To him, anyone connected to Pure wasn't just a contributor to his financial ruin. They had betrayed him, and Li was on a relentless mission to make them pay. But here's where things take a turn. As investigators delved deeper into Li's phone and financial records, they uncovered something startling. There were multiple phone conversations between Li and the couple. This connection completely shifted the focus of the investigation and opened the door to a far more complex conspiracy. In the many text messages exchanged between Li and the couple, there was a clear pattern of desperation and anger that emerged. Both sides harbored intense resentment toward the victim, especially the couple, who blamed her for persuading them to invest a significant amount of money into a coin that ultimately crashed. Their shared frustration over losing so much money created a bond, and the messages revealed just how deeply they blamed the victim for their misfortune. But one of these messages was particularly chilling. Amid their discussions about the conflict with the victim, Li sent a text referencing her, ending with the haunting words, "Shall I get rid of it?" Before the year 2021, the cryptocurrency Pure gained an immense amount of traction among enthusiasts and investors. Among them were Yu Sang-won and his wife Hwang Eun-Yuni, who had been persuaded to invest by someone they trusted, the 8-year-old female victim at the heart of this case. Persuaded by her expertise and the Pure coin's rising reputation, the couple poured more than $700,000 into the venture. However, by early 2021, Pure had collapsed, losing more than 95% of its value. For Yu and Hwang, this was catastrophic. The fortune they had worked so hard to build was gone in the blink of an eye. The couple quickly pointed fingers at the victim, the woman who had persuaded them to invest, blaming her for their financial downfall. But they weren't alone. As the crash of the coin rippled through the community, the victim became a focal point for growing tensions and mounting disputes. One of those disputes was with Li Qiangwu, a former law firm employee and someone with ties to the same cryptocurrency firm. Li, like many others, had lost everything when Pure's value plummeted. The only difference was that Li was more than just angry, he was desperate. In the months that followed the crash, tensions boiled over. However, the situation had become rather complex, as there was a tangled relationship between Li, the Yu couple, and the victim. To put it simply, Li and a group of other investors, including the victim, had suffered massive losses. When PPURE's value collapsed in the aftermath, their frustration turned toward Hwang Eun-hee. Yu Sang-won's wife Hwang had a significant personal stake in the coin. Her family's investment was massive, and she was likely doing everything she could to boost its value. But in her efforts to keep the coin afloat, it seems she may have inadvertently contributed to its crash. This only fueled the anger of Li and the other investors. They saw her as someone whose actions had caused their losses, and they demanded compensation for what they believed was manipulation of the token's price. The pressure mounted, and eventually Hwang paid out close to 200 million won, or just over $145 $100,000 US to settle the dispute. Interestingly, however, this payment was later deemed an act of extortion by local authorities. Among the group that was seeking restitution, Lee and the victim played key roles in pressuring Huang to hand over the money. But while they may have received some payout from Huang, their victory was short-lived because the resentment had deepened. Sources state that the Yu couple viewed both the victim and Lee as threats, holding them personally responsible for their financial collapse, but their anger wasn't evenly distributed because they placed more blame on one than the other. This growing hostility set the stage for something much darker. Because not long after the Yu couple approached Lee with an offer 70 million won in exchange for a solution that would end their conflict with the victim for good. In other words, that's about $50,000 for Lee to get rid of the problem. While Lee had once stood against Huang and Yu, the allure of money and his own desperation led him to switch sides. What began as a financial dispute was now quickly spiraling into a cold and calculated plan for murder. The plan was as ruthless as it was straightforward. But for the Yu couple, this wasn't just about revenge. They wanted more. Their sights were set on the victim's remaining wealth. If Lee could recover her passwords and access her cryptocurrency accounts, it would mean even more money to cover their losses. For them, the murder wasn't the only goal, it was just part of the payoff. But Lee knew he couldn't pull it off alone. It's possible that the thought of committing the crime himself crossed his mind, but he likely realized that the risks were too great. So he turned to someone he trusted, his former college classmate. Huang Dehan. Likely Huang had been hit hard by financial struggles and was desperate for a way out. The two shared an unspoken understanding, bound by their need to escape the weight of their circumstances. Together they recruited another accomplice, 30-year-old Yeon Ji-ho, an unemployed man with mounting frustrations of his own. For Yeon, this wasn't just an opportunity to make quick money. It was a way to feel like he had control over his life again. Lee was assembling a team not just to carry out a crime, but to ensure he could distance himself from the dirtiest parts of the job. And in his mind, if they succeeded, he would walk away with clean hands and a pocket full of cash. To ensure the plan would succeed, they enlisted a fourth individual whose sole job was to track the victim. For days, this person followed her movements, studying her daily routine, her patterns, and her vulnerabilities. To make the plan work, every single detail mattered. As the date of the crime drew closer, Lee began devising the method he would use to ensure that the victim wouldn't leave the encounter alive. He considered various methods, but they all led to the same conclusion. He needed a tool that could get the job done quickly while leaving as little evidence behind as possible. It's likely that multiple possibilities crossed his mind. He may have thought about more conventional methods such as strangulation or using a weapon, but those came with significant risks, leaving evidence causing a scene or the plan falling apart in the heat of the moment. He was looking for something discreet, something that wouldn't immediately raise suspicion if it were ever traced back. And that's when ketamine came into the picture. His access came through his wife, a nurse at a plastic surgery clinic where ketamine was routinely used in surgical procedures. For Lee's plan, it was the perfect solution. Lee likely rationalized that a few injections of the drug would not only sedate the victim, but also render her vulnerable enough to extract the cryptocurrency passwords and keys. But he knew that ketamine wasn't just a sedative. It could be lethal in high doses, and that was exactly what he needed. Sources state that Lee's wife did indeed supply him with the ketamine, but it's unclear how much of his plan she truly understood. Did she know he intended to use it to commit murder, or did she believe it was for something entirely different? Regardless of what she knew, Lee secured the drug, fully aware of its deadly potential. With the team in place, their preparations complete, and the date set, everything was now in motion. And on March 29th, 2023, the time had come to put their plan into action. With the police investigation underway, the hunt for the perpetrators quickly began to yield results, as evidence and leads started to point directly to those responsible for the brutal crime. The CCTV footage obtained by the police clearly showed Lee and his accomplices directly involved in the abduction, therefore the evidence against them was undeniable. However, the police needed to uncover the full scope of the crime, in particular identifying every single individual who was involved and ensuring they would face justice. Lee's phone records showed calls and messages with several individuals including Hang Dae-hin and Yeon Ji-ho. Tracing his financial transactions, police uncovered a suspicious payment of 70 million won from Yoo Sang-wen and his wife. This payment was no coincidence. It connected the couple to the crime, raising more questions about their involvement. Within weeks, police arrested Lee, Hwang, Yeon, and the Yoo couple. But even as the suspects were brought in, the full story of what had happened and why was still unraveling. It was becoming clear that this was a premeditated operation, and the most incriminating evidence came from Lee's financial transactions. A 70 million won payment from the Yoo couple. This raised a critical question. What exactly were they paying Lee for? When police looked deeper into their connection, they discovered the ongoing disputes over the cryptocurrency Pure and the Yoo couple's financial losses. By mid-April 2023, they also uncovered a key piece of the crime: the ketamine used to kill the victim traced back to Lee's wife, a nurse at a plastic surgery clinic. For the police, it was a major breakthrough. They now had the alleged mastermind, his accomplices, and the couple who had paid for the crime. All that remained was to deliver justice. As the suspects faced trial, the full extent of their crime came to light. Prosecutors painted a picture of greed, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder. The evidence was overwhelming: CCTV footage of the abduction, phone records showing meticulous planning, and the financial trail that led directly to the Yoo couple. Lee Kyung-woo initially confessed to the crime, but later recanted, claiming his confession had been coerced and that he never intended to kill the victim. Hwang Dae-hin, his close accomplice, pointed fingers back at Lee, insisting that Lee had orchestrated every detail. Meanwhile, Yeon Ji-ho admitted his involvement in the crime, offering little defense. On the other hand, the Yoo couple denied ever paying Lee to commit the murder, claiming that the money paid to him was for unrelated reasons. However, the court found their explanations unconvincing, concluding that they had financed the crime in a desperate bid to recover their losses and take revenge on the victim. After months of testimony, the final verdict was delivered. Lee Kyung-woo and Hang Dae-hin were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Their accomplice Yeon Ji-ho received a 25-year sentence for his cooperation and lesser role in the plot. As the supplier of the ketamine used in the murder, Lee's wife was also convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. One of the most haunting aspects of this crime was the verdict of the Yoo couple. Although they were not directly involved in the killing, many critics argue that the couple deserved equally harsh punishments. After all, they were the ones who financed the crime. Without their money, it's unlikely that Lee would have carried out such a calculated and brutal act. Critics point out that by paying Lee 70 million won, the couple not only enabled the crime, but also ensured its success, making them just as responsible for the outcome those who physically carried out the murder. Their role, though indirect, was pivotal, proved that their desire for revenge and greed outweighed any sense of morality. Ultimately, they were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Yoo Sang-won received an 8-year prison sentence, while his wife Hwang Eun was sentenced to 6 years. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.